Good afternoon, everyone. I, Sneha, on behalf of NEN and Wadhwani Foundation, would like to invite you all for this webinar and also introduce our expert. Kiran John has almost a decade of senior marketing leadership experience, working with peers, providers, and vendors across US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. John is presently Global Head of Marketing at Indegene, a premier provider of R&D, commercial and marketing solutions to the world's top 15 pharmaceutical companies. Prior to that, Kiran headed the marketing and solution design functions at Sequoia-funded startup SCIO Health Analytics, where he built both solutions from scratch, leading to its most recent achievement as Inc. magazine's top 500 fast-growing American companies. His expertise lies in digital marketing, entrepreneurship, and healthcare, complete value chain. He has a bachelor's degree in business management awarded by Bangalore University and a master's degree in international management awarded by the Strathclyde Business School, UK. Before I hand over the floor to Kiran, here are a few reminders to the audience. You will all be on mute, and you may ask questions by typing in the panel provided. Over to you, Kiran.
Thank you so much, Sneha, for that warm introduction. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad to see that we've got quite a lot of attendees. So this seems like a very interesting topic. I hope I do justice to it. As Sneha was mentioning, that I presently run marketing for a pharmaceutical services company called Indegene. In the past, I've worked with a Sequoia-funded firm called SCIO Health Analytics. I used to run marketing and solution design for them up until very recently. I have also been associated with Frost & Sullivan and with Wokhart Hospitals prior to that. In my current role, I'm responsible for digital marketing, and I think this topic fits very nicely into that sphere. This is something that my teams do almost on a daily basis. This is something I'm very passionate about. So I'm going to try and highlight some of the things that I've learned over the years. Just as a disclaimer of sorts, I'm here today presenting my views. We're a large company. I don't represent the views of Indegene particularly or its subsidiaries. So this presentation has been put together keeping in mind the things that I've learned over the years of running marketing departments globally, some of the things that I've learned. So let's maybe step back for a minute and really look at why email marketing, why all this buzz about email marketing. In my mind, I think it's because, one, from a B2C perspective, our customers now are further away. They can be reached more easily. We don't have geographical confines like we did maybe just about 10 years ago before liberalization, right? So the dynamics have changed. So how do you create share of voice? I think creating share of voice has become a big challenge both on the consumer side of the business as well as on the B2B side. So that's one aspect that's sort of driving email marketing. The second is that today you need to stay engaged with your client or your customer. So it's important that you try and create low cost, multiple touch points throughout the sales cycle. So if you're in the B2B space, if your businesses or your current functions, if you operate in the B2B space, definitely appreciate this a little bit more. It's important that you stay connected with your audience and you're able to engage with them continuously. The objectives of that engagement could be different. In some places, you want to be creating awareness. In some places, you want to start some conversations with people. In other places, you want to nurture leads so that they open up opportunities. And of course, that hopefully will lead into some revenues and some dollars in the bank. The third reason why email marketing, in my mind, is starting to pick up quite heavily is that it's a relatively inexpensive method to stay engaged, and it's definitely cheaper than hiring feet on the ground. Right? So if you're in a global business or you have multiple regions or even just multiple cities, there's only that much you can spend on sales and marketing. So your SG&A costs have to be optimized. Maybe a little difficult to do that. The fourth is that you want to be able to balance both your new business activities as well as nurturing activities. So how do you help clients and customers appreciate the value of your products and services? I think that's really becoming another big piece of the puzzle. Today, it's no longer enough for you to just go out there and say, this is what I have to sell, this is the value proposition, this is why you need to work with me. I think today customers and clients are looking for value. And the value may be in you providing knowledge, in you providing thought leadership, in you helping them solve problems. So the whole shift from service to solution, that's a big trend. The fourth area is that today on the B2B space, and a lot of my experience, as you would have heard from Sneha's introduction, has largely been on the B2B space. So my presentation is a little more skewed to those of you all that join us today from the B2B side of the business. So from a stakeholder perspective, today you may be selling one product, but you could have 7 different types of buyers. You could have 7 different types of segments. So classic Ansoff matrix, if you go back to your old MBA days, right? So some classic marketing on that front. So how do you manage those messages? How do you ensure that the same product in a different segment, same product in a different market, how do you manage those messages? So that managing of the messages and how do you stay positioned correctly, that's another big piece of the puzzle. And doing it only via sales, of course, is a very difficult and expensive way to do it. The other reason that I think now email marketing is really becoming important is that you want to reduce the cost per lead. So today, if the only way for you to generate leads is to go to a conference and spend 10,000 rupees as an attendee's fee, that can become a really expensive thing to do in the long run. So you need to find a way to optimize your cost per lead, and sometimes email marketing is a great way to skim the surface and get your sales and marketing departments moving. The next reason I think that's really important is also you have the ability now to deliver dynamic messages, right? So if you think of the typical sales engagement process, it starts off with some cold calling. You may send the guy a PPT slide. You might set up a telecon. So that it is sort of limited in many ways. So how do you actually now leverage video, for example? How do I leverage interactive content? So today you have those modes and mediums available to you. So it's important to figure out a really nice way of packaging and delivering those messages. So sometimes email marketing could be a nice way to deliver interactive content to your end user or to an influencer that didn't exist, not too many years ago. The last reason in my mind is it also gives you a very unique opportunity to build brand associations and perceptions about your brand, whether it is associating yourself with certain attributes, whether it's to do with efficiency, effectiveness, certain brand attributes. So I think by constantly staying engaged with your audience, this in the mind of the consumer helps reinforce the positioning that you want. So you have a great opportunity to reinforce the positioning. So if you really think about what we just spent the last couple of minutes just sort of describing, email marketing has a lot more to do than selling, right? So we talked about how it's important to leverage it as a tool to increase your share of voice, manage multiple stakeholders, nurture your leads into conversions, lower the cost per lead. So these are some of the main drivers where large companies today are investing a fair amount of money on digital marketing. In fact, on the pharma side of the business, digital marketing is pretty much the way to go in emerging markets. So that's Vietnam, China, India, Middle East, Turkey. These are some countries that we see a lot of this kind of stuff happening. So digital marketing is a big piece. Now, in order to make this work, what do you really need to do? Right, so let's try and identify some of those things. The first, and I think really, really important one, is that you have to define your target audience in your segments. I've seen so much of email marketing over the years that it's been so vague. Just buy some list from somewhere, telephone list, just bombard people with information. A lot of the guys who are receiving this information aren't even your prospects. They don't even fall into the correct category. They're not falling into the right demographic segment. So very, very broad brush approach. Contrary to popular belief, in my mind, I think that's the disaster, right? So if you're really clear about who you are, what you want to do, what your product does, you should be very clear about who your buyer is. How do you reach them? Where does he sit? What is his role? How does he sit in the organization? who are the other influencers? You're selling a transformational solution, for example, finance becomes a big influencer, or there may be a business unit somewhere else. So I think really spend time before you dive into email marketing to really define who your target audience is, how many types of buyers exist, where are these buyers, what influences them, where do they stay, how old are they, what is the income level, which cities you want to target first. Really get zeroed into who your target audience is. So point number one, very important. The second is build a comprehensive list. Now, many people I've seen, and I'm also a recipient of a lot of spam, right? So in marketing positions in any company that hold budgets, typically we get bombarded by at least 10, 15 vendors every single day trying to sell us something. Many of them just get our email IDs by guessing it, first name dot last name at the domain name. So that's a very popular technique how people make up email IDs, and sometimes it just goes to the wrong people. So I think it's very important to build a comprehensive list, and there are, if you're on the B2B side of the business, there are some good lists out there that you can use. There's Jigsaw, which is an aggregator. LinkedIn is fast becoming a very important list. I think you should also, if you don't have premier accounts to LinkedIn, definitely worth the investment in a sales and marketing role. I think that's been helpful. The last one here, which I talked about paid lists. Now these paid lists are very different from the typical paid lists. So what I mean by paid lists here, these are lists, maybe subscription databases to Harvard Business Review. I'm making some of this up, but I think the underlying point is important, which is if you partner with journals or with magazines, typically their subscription lists are higher quality. So maybe they can run the email for you, for example. So you can work with HDFC, ICICI, Citibank. A lot of these banks, for example, in India do this. You can send them an email, or they'll charge you 5,000 or 10,000 rupees to send it out to a small group of their customers who solicit this kind of information. It could be a great way for you to get your message out there. Only drawback is that you won't have access to the database. But I think as small businesses, it's a good way to create some immediate traction. The third very, very important thing to make this whole process work is that you need to use technology, right? I've seen so many instances of people sending the same message to the same person over and over again. Every day the same message goes out. That really, really affects your brand, and it sends the wrong message overall. So I think today, as one takeaway, I think style is as important as substance. If you're going to be projecting your company through these emailers, make sure that you're sending a positive image, that you're not harassing people, you're not sending it to a lot of irrelevant people that aren't really your buyers. Now, if you have to do that, you have to do your research, you've got to do your homework, make sure that you're targeting the people that you want. And this stuff takes time. So building a good list and reaching out to people, it takes time. It's not a one, there's no magic button, there's no magic wand here. It really takes some time. And if you use technology, it can help you deliver those messages. And I'm going to talk about delivery strategies a little later on in this presentation. So I want you to just hold that thought, and we'll get to a slide in this deck that I've actually blown that up a little bit. The fourth is I want you to also set a very clear goal for your campaign. What is it that you want this campaign to do? Are you looking at it as a brand building exercise? Then your expectation has to change. So you can't expect a ton of leads coming in if you're just saying, okay, I want to get my brand name out there, I want to get my product name out there. That's all I'm looking for. So set the goal. I think before you get into running an email campaign, make sure you set your goal very clearly and how you want to measure it. Are you going to measure it using eyeballs? Are you going to measure it using clicks? Are you going to measure it using leads? Are you going to measure it using conversions? So I think it's important to define that measurement criteria, and then as you succeed and fail, you will change your strategy to find what works best in your business and in your particular product segment. The fifth, which I've sort of already talked about a little bit, so I can speed through this one, is defining your messages. So your value prop is going to change, the call to actions are going to change. I also see a lot of mails, more recently, strangely, but more recently I've seen a lot of mails where the customer path is a little confused. So you send the person an email, he has to click there, then he has to fill a form, then he has to do this, then he has to do that. So don't make the customer's life difficult. Keep it very simple. As much intelligence as you can gather from using technology, it's better to use that instead of going and asking your customer to keep filling in forms, right? So I'm going to talk about messaging strategy as well later on. And the last one, which is you got to make sure that you set everything up front before you launch a campaign. So don't do campaigns where in the middle of your campaign you're creating content, in the middle of the campaign you're creating other templates. So don't do that. Get everything set up in the beginning, prep it, build out the campaign, deploy it, set up some follow-ups to make sure that it's working, and then lastly measure. I think in essence these are sort of the 6 broad elements that I think are really important. So these are in my mind your critical success factors, if you will. Now the way that I look at strategies for e-marketing and in particular email marketing, I think there are 5 broad strategies, right, if we break them down. There is how do you get a good quality list? Strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is how do I optimize the message so that I get the highest response rates. 3 is how do I ensure that my message gets delivered? So today that's a big challenge. How do I ensure delivery? 4th is how do I get my sales team to become part of this whole process? And the 5th is what kind of analytics can I use and how can I make better decisions using those analytics? So let's take a closer look at each of these strategies. Let's start with the list strategy. Today, as I talked about a little bit earlier, really important that you define your customer. So sometimes what I like to do, and I get my teams to do this a lot, is build out a communication grid. Right? Write down the products on one column in one row, and in all the different other columns on top, you put your different buying centers, right? And you carve out the message and the value proposition as it pertains to a particular product. Now, at the end of that whole exercise, you're left with this, X by X matrix that clearly maps out which solutions get sold to who, what the value proposition is going to be, what the message is going to be. At the end of that exercise, it will give you insight into how many versions of the same emailer you may need. So you might realize, hey, you know what, for CEOs, I got to have message 1, but for CFOs, I got to have message 2. For end consumers, I got to use message 5. It'll help you get your head around exactly who you're selling to and how you want those messages to get delivered. Very important. The second is use Excel. I particularly like to use Excel for a lot of things, for decision making in particular. Simple things like creating a list of rules. So if you're saying, if my recipient has to be someone between the age of 20 to 30, has to be in the income bracket of, I'm making this stuff up, 5 to 10 lakhs, and he has to live in an urban neighborhood, then that really will eliminate a lot of other people in my general list. So I think that's really important to build some list criteria rules. The third is a very important change in email marketing that we've seen over the last few years. It's called permission-based mails. Now what permission-based mails are, they are lists of people who solicit your communication. And the reason they want to solicit your communication is because they are under the assumption, or there is proof, that you're adding value to their lives. Now what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, let's take an example of a technology company. Right? Now let's say this technology company opens up a blog. Now that blog talks about all the different changes in the sphere of technology and communications. It publishes great content, it provides links, it does webinars, so on and so forth. It's creating value for the reader. Now in that particular case, they've created a product that creates value for the end user. The second thing that it's also doing is it allows people to subscribe for these services. You are far more likely to get your messages read to people who want your messages delivered to them in the first place. So how do you expand that funnel of people who actually want you to send them messages? Now that's this whole philosophy of permission-based mails. So I think almost on every single corporate website, you must have a link there to subscribe to a mailing list, to subscribe to news, to subscribe to company buzz. Some sort of subscription is very important, and you start to source your leads from there. These are people who willingly give you information about themselves, their name, where they live, depending on whatever fields you need for your business. Then make sure that you try and push more permission-based mails. Your response rates are significantly higher. The fourth, which I've also talked about, is sort of the difference between value and self-promotion. Now, all email marketing doesn't need to be based around the goal of wanting to sell something. Sometimes you may want to educate the customer. I remember many, many years ago in the insurance side of the business in India, many people didn't buy health insurance, right? Even today, the percentage is fairly low. So there was a lot of education that was required by companies to actually sell their insurance. I remember, when the first MNCs came into India in the insurance, they spent a lot of money educating people about what insurance was. Eventually, LIC took a lot of their business because they had a stronger brand. But the point was that they spent a lot of money communicating and educating. Sometimes in some businesses that have fairly novel products and services, you may need to educate before you can sell. So sometimes it's important to use email marketing not only as a tool to sell, but also as a tool to educate. So I want you to try and think about how do I create 80% value through education, through knowledge sharing, through engagement, and 20% saying, oh, by the way, I also provide these services and this is how I can help you. I found that method to be quite important. The next point I think in list strategy is really the focus on quality. So today there's no point having a list with 5,000 people that you don't even know where they live, where can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so sorry about that. I lost, I got dropped off. So I was talking about the focus on quality versus quantity. I think it's really important to have, even if it's a small list, it doesn't matter. Ensure that the quality of your lists are good. And there are many ways that you can, there are many techniques available to build a good list. So for example, attending webinars, going to conferences, meeting people, getting your sales team once a week to drop off their business cards for them to get scanned. So sales guys typically go meet a ton of customers. Very rarely does it actually end up being filled up in the Salesforce database, for example. How do you make sure that you're not dropping the ball on that? All these small little tactics will ensure that you have a good quality list. Store them on some sort of technology CRM type of platform, whether it's salesforce.com, or if you want to use, there are other paid platforms like iContact, Constant Contact. There's a free application that you can use. It's not free, it's a paid application, but it runs off of your server. It's called SendBlaster. These are some tools that I've used in the past. I found them to be pretty good to manage these lists. The other is that also subscribe to industry newsletters, journals. Some of them will also allow you to send email blasts. So that I talked about it earlier. That's a great way to have a good list. And this stuff takes time. There's really no shortcut. I know companies have taken 10 years to build their lists, but their lists are probably worth 10 or 15 million dollars if you really think about the depth of information they have about their clients and their customers. So it's really important for all sales marketing departments to spend time on it. Very important. Uh, the second strategy is really about messaging. So you've got your great list. It's filtered. It's high quality. What next? I think it's really important to distill your message. Now you've set your goal. You're saying, okay, if your goal is to create awareness, make sure your distilled message is meeting that goal. Very important. The second aspect is there are a lot of other filters that in email marketing that prevents your message from being delivered. Now, for example, a lot of people, at least on the B2B side, if you're using Outlook or you're using Lotus Notes, those are largely the two big email platforms that people use. 80% of people read their mail in the preview window, which means nobody is really double-clicking on your mail to actually read it. 8 out of 10 people will read it in the window. Now, what does that mean from a design and messaging perspective? It means that your subject lines have to be smaller because it's going to be skewed in a smaller space. So 4 or 5 words about the benefit of the offer. So if you're B2B, you talk about what you want to say very quickly. If it's B2C, then you're going to say, I'm selling a book free or there's a complimentary book. Then make that your subject title. Complimentary book to valued customers. 5 to 6 words, the message is across. The way you define your messages and you design your messages also is layered, right? So you've got to think of your reader as 3-4 different types of readers. One is what I sort of call the patient reader, who will double click, who will read every word that you say, who will spend time and reflect on the message and take a decision. Patient reader, he probably doesn't exist anymore. The slightly more impatient reader will double click, scan through your mail. If something seems interesting, in less than 10 or 15 seconds, he's going to take a call whether you should do something or not. So that's the window. You're looking at a 10 to 15 second window. The even more impatient person will just read the subject line and see if it relates to him or not. So I think it's really important to keep these different users in mind when you're crafting a message. So some of the things that I found in the past to be quite helpful is left align all your content, because in the preview window you can at least make sure that your content appears. Second is wrap your content so that it doesn't disappear into the right hand side of the window and you don't get to read it. So somebody can read your whole mailer like that. The third is have 2 call to actions, one in hyperlink format and one in a message button. So we're saying click now, don't hide it as a hyperlink only. Have a button that says click now or click here or register or submit. It has to be an action, something that you want them to do. The fourth is get to the point quickly. So you don't need to, I know that a lot of technology people, for example, are very passionate about technology, right? But they'll have a tendency to go on and about whether it's .NET or SQL, and they'll go on and on in the emails about why this is the greatest thing in the world. I don't think your client is interested in that. So get to the point very quickly. How are you going to change his life? How are you going to add value to his life? Why should he invest his money in you? Why should he buy your product or render your services? I think you have to get to the point fast, very clear. 10 to 12 lines emailer is more than enough. There is also an assumption in the marketplace that all emailers need to have an email banner. It has to look like a box. It has to have a logo. I don't think that's necessarily true. Sometimes what you may want to do from a sales perspective is even send out all your first level communication through an email system. At least when you send it out to an email system, it will look exactly like a formal written letter, but at least when your prospects read it, and the back end you have some analytics to tell your sales guy, hey, by the way, the 15 leads that you wanted to go after, only 5 of them open the mail. Then you think about, okay, was there a problem with who I'm reaching out to? Is there a problem with what I'm selling? Is there a problem with the message that I'm trying to deliver? What is not working here, right? If in an ideal marketplace, if all those 3 things converge nicely, then you should be getting the traction. So if you're not getting traction, then it's one of those 3 things that are typically the problem. So I think message crafting good quality messages is important, and also to have different messages for different stakeholders. From a delivery perspective, I think I've talked about this before, and we talked about how it's important to actually have a technology platform to deliver your messages. I'll spend a couple of minutes telling you what that could be. I'm sure most of us on call have heard of these different systems out there. I'm reasonably sure a lot of you already use it, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. But I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's important to use technology to deliver. One is it allows you a lot of flexibility in maybe even designing a respectable looking emailer, making sure that the messages are consistent, that you're having a way to manage all the unsubscribes, the spams. You have to be able to do all that as part of email marketing. You must have an option for people to unsubscribe. Otherwise, it's considered spam. I wish I should have actually added another slide here on spam rules, but maybe we'll just talk about it in a few points. So I think some of the things that you need to do is you need to allow people to unsubscribe. That's a very important aspect. And if you don't use technology, then it becomes the unsubscribe process is a very painful process. So I've seen a lot of mails where it will give you the option to unsubscribe, but when you click on it, it asks you to send an email to somebody, put some words in the subject line and reply. These are very shoddy and amateur ways of handling this. So use technology, pay the $20, $30 a month, and add value to your brand. Very important. The second is, when do you send out mails, right? So there must be some window where people read mails more than others. So research suggests that there are a few things that you can do to optimize the delivery. One is typically don't send it on a Friday, don't send it on a Monday. Usually people are tuning out on Friday, or people are catching up with other stuff on Monday when they get back into the office. This is more in, in, in North America and Europe, where people actually take 5-day weeks. In India, not everybody has a 5-day week, but it still seems to hold true. The second is, send it out in the morning. Let's assume that people get into the office by about 9:30. They've had some time to check mail. They're starting to get busy. At about 11 o'clock, 11:30 is a good time to send mails. So if you use technology, you can actually set a delivery time. So I can create my mails 1 week in advance and say, okay, I want to send this mail out on the 25th of Jan at 11 a.m. Set up the system and go and do something else. You can start to work a lot more efficiently, especially when you're managing multiple campaigns. You have multiple stakeholders, multiple products, multiple regions. It's a good way to get to start working a little more effectively. The third is using analytics to resend messages. This is a very smart way to do this. So let's say that you have a list of 100 people that you want to reach out to. You send them the first mail. If you use a technology platform, it'll tell you who opened, who didn't open. The guys who didn't open, you can resend the message again maybe the next day. You don't have to worry about it because you know he hasn't seen it anyway, right? So if you send it to him again, you're not bothering him. The people who you've already sent it to, now you don't want to send them the same message over and over again. So I've seen that happen a lot, and I've been the unfortunate recipient of some of this stuff. And I really don't like it, because I think that the guy who's sending it out clearly is not doing a good job. So if he knows that I've read a mail and I'm not responded, give me some time to either respond back to you or to ignore you, right? I have the right to do that as well. So use analytics to resend messages to people who haven't opened. Try it a couple of times, and after that just give up and then go back to the drawing board and figure out why it didn't work. Was there a problem with who I mailed? Was there a problem with the mailer? Was there a problem with the message? Should I have sent it at a different time? Am I sending it to the right person? I want to then start to introspect and ask yourself those questions before bombarding the same messages to the same people over and over again. Now, when you send your first sets of mails, I think use the feedback to clean up your list. If you know things bounce, take those guys permanently, block them out of your list. So over time, when you start to do this for a period of 5 to 6 months, you'll end up in the period of about 5 to 6 months, you'll end up with a reasonable list. A list of contacts that deliver, you know the title is correct, you know the person is correct, you know the message is getting delivered. I think that's important. So use the feedback to clean up your list. So final list is actually a culmination of a lot of smaller failed campaigns. I think it's also important from a global perspective. If you happen to be running campaigns across regions globally, make sure you have somebody in your marketing department in the office during that time. Because sometimes what will happen is, you know, especially if you're a typical IT Indian company and you do a lot of business in markets that are not in India, then you may send out a campaign, but then what you may also realize is that someone has a question, oh, by the way, can you send me something? You don't want to keep that guy hanging a whole 24 hours before you get back to him. Keep somebody in your team in the office to respond back to mails. Really important to run the process professionally. There is some service attached to the process of sending mails. Very important. Another thing which I think most people on this call will probably know is, don't use attachments if you can avoid it. So don't add large files, don't add large presentations, 10 MB presentation. All that stuff is not even getting to the inbox. It's getting blocked by firewalls. IT departments spend their whole life devising ways for your message not to reach people, right? So as they continue to devise ways for that, you got to get smart. So don't use attachments. If you know the person and you know the list, you've made contact with them and you know that you're a safe sender, if you want to send them something, that's fine. But try and zip the file or reduce the quality of the PDF. If you use Acrobat, there's an option under document called reduce file size. You can click on it and it'll actually help reduce the size of your PDF files. Make it a bit respectable. Under 300 KB is reasonable. And of course, I talked about the last thing, which is to set up a permission-based system. So the permission-based system will allow you to collect leads. It'll help you to nurture. It'll help you ensure that you're sending messages to people who really want to hear from you. The next strategy is what I call sales integration. I know a lot of marketing departments that don't necessarily marry this whole process of marketing and sales very neatly. Right? I think it's very important today to actually integrate sales into your process. So what that would mean? So when you say integrate integrate sales, what does that mean? It means that you work with sales to find out whether the people that you're sending mails to, do they still exist in these companies? Have people moved on? They're going to have on the ground intelligence that your marketing department may or may not have, because you're not sitting and talking all the time to clients. So go to people in your organization, to talk to people who know who's moved, who's there, whose function has changed, whose responsibility has changed. Get that intelligence, put that into your list. The second is, before you send your mailers out, make sure that you get sales to validate it, right? So when they look at the list, they'll say, oh, by the way, this guy has left, he's no longer there. This other person you need to add, this new guy they've hired. So I think it's important to build that logic into your process. And the other thing is, it will also show sales that you're in it together, that you're working very closely with them, and that you all have vested interest in growing the brand and, of course, driving revenues for the sales team. The second is that they have to get something out of it. If sales doesn't get anything out of the whole email marketing process, then they're not going to support you when you want to do something larger. I think it's important for you to create value for them, and the value that you can create can be as small as sending them the analytics reports. Oh, by the way, we ran this campaign in your region. These are 10 guys that seem interested in the service. Why don't you give them a call? Right? I think that's great value for a salesperson, because it's from his perspective, it's almost zero effort. Marketing has been able to create that value, and the net result from a marketing perspective is that marketing has to create the pull, right? So sales creates push, marketing creates pull. So this is a great marriage between the two. Create value for your sales team, very important. The third is integrate it formally. Make it a formal process of marketing and sales talking with each other, whether it's twice a month, whether it's weekly. It really depends on your organization and what you want to get out of it. But I think it's so important for you to map your sales goals to marketing initiatives, whether the marketing initiative is an email campaign, whether it's a brand building campaign. I think it's very important for sales to have a vested interest in the process, to contribute, to share intelligence, what works, what doesn't work, and more importantly, to also follow up. In the B2B space, email marketing by itself seldom does much. You have to map it with an actual sales follow-up. You have to have salespeople calling and saying, hey, by the way, I sent you an email. I wanted to find out if you had a chance to look at it. Can we talk? I think that follow-up call, meticulously done, is really the secret sauce in this whole thing. If you're selling pure B2C, then obviously you can't call every single customer, but I think that's where you go higher level and you start talking to channel partners, you start talking to aggregators. So there is still a follow-up aspect, but it doesn't happen at the individual level. It probably happens at the aggregator level. So I think that follow-up process is important. And the last point from a sales integration process is get your marketing team to own it, right? So sometimes if you don't clearly define an owner, your marketing is going to own the whole process. We will design the campaign, we will run it, we will supply metrics, we will do reporting, we will set up calls, we will work with sales. Somebody has to own the process, otherwise nobody will usually do it. So in my opinion, I've seen marketing owning it and doing a good job. That's what I would propagate, important for there to be a clear owner for success as well as for failure. My last strategy, ladies and gentlemen, is really around using analytics. Today we talked about messaging, we talked about a great list, we talked about delivery strategy, right? We talked about integrating sales into the process, we talked about multiple messaging. I think the last piece of the puzzle is really getting feedback. One of the ways that a lot of e-marketers get feedback is that they use things like Google Analytics, they use impressions, they use number of eyeballs, they use number of clicks. There's so many different metrics that you can measure in the digital universe. Use those metrics to gain insight about your consumer. Study simple things like, are you getting good response rates? Are you getting enough open rates? Are too many of your leads bouncing? Do you have tons of dead leads? These will all these questions will help you understand where you're going wrong. So for example, if you run a campaign, you get tons of, a very low response rate, then ask yourself, nobody's even reading my message. So is there a problem with my message, or is my message is not getting delivered, or I'm sending it to the wrong person? Get your teams to work and try and solve those problems. And you'll figure out what's going on, what you're not doing correctly, and you'll be able to fix it. If you see a lot of bounce leads, that means your lead collection process is flawed. There's something that you're not doing correctly. maybe you're not spending enough time researching it. If you find a lot of dead leads, then you might say, okay, did I actually get wrong information? Is my solicitation process wrong? Maybe I need to do a permission-based system. So I think it's really important to do that. And the last point, what I've seen, if you follow these steps, typically a 10 to 20% response rate is a no-brainer, right? Almost 9 out of 10 campaigns that I've run in the past, I would get at least a 20 to 25% response rate. Normal email marketing, I've seen research that you see maybe about 5 to 10%. It's probably because they're not refining their target audience clearly. It might be just mass mailing people. So email marketing, keep it very crisp, keep it very focused. Make sure that your message goes only to the people that need to receive it. Don't try your luck by sending it to 10 different people in the organization, hoping that someone will forward your message to the right person. From experience, this could be just an anecdotal comment, but I've not seen that work very well. I think it's really important for you to be very clear about who you want to go after, who you need to nurture, and then you stay on target with them and don't include a ton of other people. Then if your universe reduces, then your response rate will also increase. So I think those are some of the things that I've learned over the last almost decade of doing marketing and being in the digital space. I'd love to hear questions from the group. I'd be happy to answer some.
Thank you, Kiran. We'll start with the Q&A, so you can start sending in your questions. We have the first question from Himanshu Pandey, and he asks, is signature is excluded from those 10 to 12 lines that you talked about earlier?
Hi Himanshu, thanks for your question. Yeah, you can include it or exclude it, it doesn't matter. I think what the main point behind that was, make sure that what you want to say is very crisp. Right? So if you can do something in 5 lines, do it in 5 lines. If you need 10 lines to do something, do it in 10 lines. If you need 20 lines to do something, maybe you should break up that message into 2 separate communications. So yeah, you can add your email signature. It doesn't matter. You also raised an important point. Sometimes key messages should go from key people in your organization. So if you're going to announce an acquisition, for example, let the message go out from the CEO. It has a much better impact than if it goes out from your marketing head, for example, right? Or if it goes out from somebody in your marketing department. So who's sending the message also has a weightage on how people perceive whether they should read it or not.
Thank you, Kiran. Our next question is from Matthew. He asked, what are the strategies to get new subscribers? How could a person who is not a part of your list get on board?
Okay, it's a good question. I think what you should do, it goes back to my point around creating value, right? So think about, so can I ask Matthew a question? So can you tell me which industry and product area you're in? If you can just quickly type that out, it'll help me give a slightly more focused response.
Retail. Kiran, Matthew is from retail business.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you're looking at retail, one way of doing it could be you can put up all your latest offers onto a blog. I'm just making this stuff up. It could work, right? So you put up all your latest offers on your blog. People get to see the offers only if they subscribe. Now, what you're saying is, okay, by you exchanging your contact information and staying engaged with me, you get good deals on my retail offerings. So whether it's FMCG or whatever form of retail it is, that could be a good way of doing it, especially on the B2C space. So I think customers have to feel like they are exchanging, that they're sharing their information, but they're getting something that they perceive to be of greater value. So that could be a good way for you to get some subscription. So maybe you can launch a new program called Retail Advantage, right? I'm making this stuff up, and say that, hey, my retail store, my retail chain, this blog will have the best deals that are currently going on. You need to register. So the form of registration then becomes a form of getting permission-based communication.
Our next question is from Tapasya. She asked, what should be an ideal opening of an email?
Okay, thanks for your question. I think the ideal opening should be clearly about what you want them, what you have to say to them, right? So if it's B2C, make it about the offer. If it's B2B, then I think starting off with your appreciation for his industry, so his what challenge he's currently going after, and then you talk about what you can do in that space, what your value proposition is, and a little bit about your service. So if it's a B2B mail, I typically like to structure it a little differently. I like to say, hey, this is my understanding of your problem. This is my value proposition. This is why I think you should work with me, and this is what I think my secret sauce is in enabling me to do this better than anybody else out there. And this is a very short description about what I can do for you. Can we talk? So that's a typical B2B kind of a communication. From a B2C perspective, make it about the offer. So if your offer is about selling something, then make it very clear that, hey, as a valued customer, A, B, C, D, E, this is what I have to offer you. So I think my point is B2B, appreciation of the challenge and what you can do for him. B2C, make it more about the offer.
Next question is from Ramya. He asks, what are the technology platforms to know the response rates? Can you explain more about it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, what are the technology platforms to know the response rates? Can you explain more about it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. There are a lot of technology platforms available. I can name some of the ones that I've used in the past. I'm not particularly endorsing any of them. I think they're all reasonably good. There is iContact, so single letter I-C-O-N-T-A-C-T. iContact is one. It was started by two brothers in the US, if I'm not mistaken. They sold it for a ridiculous amount of money to another company very recently. So there's tons of value in it. The second is Constant Contact, very similar platform. The third is SendBlaster. Then there are quite a few others. In fact, if you just type in email marketing in Google, you'll get a lot of these guys showing up as the first few hits. And what they all have in common is it allows you to build out a very respectable looking email using templates that they already have, so you don't have to worry about designing the stuff as well. It'll all be in HTML, so that's good. It'll help you upload a list. It'll help you send the message. At the end of it, it'll also have a reporting tab where you can see number of people that opened, number of people that clicked on something that you wanted them to click on, number of them that bounced, number of them that didn't get delivered. So to answer your question, these are some of the leading ones that I've used, and I found them to be quite good. They typically cost maybe between $20 and $35 or $40 a month, depending on how large your contact list is. So if you have a very large contact list, you end up paying a little bit more. If you have a very small contact list, then you pay a little bit less. But on average, about $30 a month is what something like this would cost.
Next question is from Mr. Rajesh Kumar. He asks, is it better to use links in email message, or should we describe complete story in message?
Good question. Thanks for that. I think it's important to provide a link instead. What you should do is insert a very short blurb. So really distill that message. So whatever your message is, if it's a description about your service, have a very short blurb about what that is. So if you're selling say like a firewall, then you talk about a firewall that you're selling in 1 or 2 sentences, and to say to learn more, please follow the link, and then provide that link to a landing page that actually talks about it in greater detail. I found that to be a good way to do it. Just providing the link without any context to the link usually doesn't get any response rate.
This is from Jayashree. She asked, what are the key strategies to draft a good newsletter?
Okay. So Jayashree, a few things here. One is you have to figure out what kind of newsletter you want to craft, right? If it's a corporate newsletter, for internal purposes, can I ask a question back? So are you looking at something to send your clients, or you're looking at something to send internally?
This is newsletter for clients.
For clients, okay. So if it's a newsletter for clients, what you should do is, I've always found using education and thought leadership as a nice newsletter. See, there's only that much you can send in terms of what you're doing as a company, right? So the person who's receiving this information has to get something out of it. So what I found is that overly corporate-y kind of newsletters, don't necessarily work very well because there's nothing in it for the reader. So you might have launched some new product or whatever. That's fine, but it's not changing my life. I think where it changes the life of the reader is if you can talk about how that's going to change the way that you work with them now, or that you're able to change, improve the quality of your service, or if you've launched a new delivery center, then what is the impact? So I think in your corporate newsletter, if you can take company happenings but make them relevant to how it applies to your customer audience, that could be a good way to do it. Also use 80% education, 20% updates. So what I mean by that is, if you're in the supply chain business, for example, have 80% of your newsletter talk about the changes in supply chain, right? So it's non-salesy, but you're adding value. And then 20% of the newsletter can have quick updates about your company. I found that 80-20 rule to be a good way to do it, especially for external. For internal, it can be all corporate updates because that's fine.
Next question is from Chandrasekhar. He asked, how do we confirm whether someone has opened our mail or not, and how much time they spent seeing it so that we can increase our reach and delivery?
Okay, good question. I feel like probably answered this question before, but I answered it once more. If you use a technology platform like iContact, in the reporting tab, it will give you an option for you to actually view all the people that have opened the mail. What it doesn't, however, do, which you very rightly pointed out, is that it doesn't tell you how much time somebody spent on it. So someone could have just opened it for half a second and closed it. It will still register as an open. Or someone could have spent 20 minutes looking at it and it will still count as one. What it will also show you, which I failed to mention in the past, it will also show you whether mails are being forwarded. So if I receive, say, an invitation to a webinar and I forward it to 20 people, the person who sent me the invitation to the webinar will know that Kiran has forwarded it to 20 other people. So you can also gauge whether whether that message is compelling enough that they've actually distributed it internally. So if you find that they are not distributing it internally, or if you find that they're not opening it, then it can help you ask those questions to yourself.
Kiran, the next question is from Shivananda. And it says, I run an e-commerce website that sells bags, and we have a list of people who bought different products from us but not the bags, and we are sending mailers to them, but we are experiencing high bounce rate. So she asks, they've used these email IDs to order initially, then how can these mails bounce, and can you help me as to why I'm getting bounced emails?
Okay. There could be a couple of possibilities. One is, I'm not sure when they purchase these, when they purchase merchandise off your website, whether you had verified the email IDs at the time. Can I ask a question back? So if you can just type out in the message, if you had verified it and then it didn't work?
No, they haven't, she didn't verify it.
Okay, so I think that's probably a problem. So what you should do going forward on your portal, there are very simple ways for you to actually, when people buy the product, they submit their contact information, and they also provide their email address. What you could do is you can provide a link. So when they submit it, it sends that email address a link to complete the transaction. So after they open up their email account, they get an email and it'll say, to complete this transaction, please click on this link. You click on the link, it takes you back to the portal, and then it completes the transaction. Now there is a drawback with doing that. Though you will get authentic email IDs, the drawback is that you're making it even more complicated to buy stuff off your website. So what you would ideally want to do is find a balance between the two. What I would suggest doing is launching a program, maybe like the one that I had suggested to the gentleman who is in retail, right? Maybe you can launch a special offers program or advantage card, or one of the reasons, in fact, why a lot of retail stores like Shopper Stop and all these other guys, they actually have those loyalty cards. It's not particularly because they want to give you some 10% discount. It's because they want to measure your customer, they want to measure customer behavior. They want to know what you buy, how much you spend. So the only way for them to track that is using a loyalty card. So maybe you can in fact even launch a loyalty card and attach some discounts to that loyalty card. It'll help you track what your customers are doing and in turn the quality of information you have about them.
Next question is from Sonal. She asked, you talked about when to send an email, but she wants to know how often can we send?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say you shouldn't be mailing people more than twice a week. That's maximum. I think anything more than that is bordering harassment. So I think twice a week is more than fine if it's unsolicited. If it's solicited, maybe once a week. But you have to pick the format in which you want to communicate with them. Maybe you can do a monthly newsletter. Once a month, if somebody hears from you, that's okay. That's not bad. If they're going to hear from you 3-4 times a week, especially around some offer and things like that, they can, they will get a bit frustrated and they may end up blocking your domain completely. Very recently, I remember I kept getting emails about some contact database. I wrote an email to IT and said, just block these guys permanently, right? They will never get an email delivered in my company anymore. Mainly because the method that people use shouldn't turn people off. Because it's not a good way to start a relationship with someone if you're just bombarding them with tons of mails. So again, 2 mails maybe a week, and maximum 2 mails a week. But then if you can convert that into like a weekly newsletter, or you can convert it into a monthly newsletter, then it's probably better to just use that once a month, higher quality, richer content, more interactive than multiple communications, twice a week.
Our next question is from Saeed. He asks, what are the legal issues associated with email marketing?
Okay, this is a fantastic question. So one of the big issues with email marketing, I think, is your spam rules. Right? So there are a lot of spam laws, especially in the US, that govern that you should first mail people only who want to be emailed, that you have to allow them to unsubscribe, that they cannot, that you should limit the amount of unsolicited information that you're sharing, that it should become more permission based. And now what's also happening is a lot of these technology vendors in this space, like iContact and all of them, they are also now requiring and monitoring your lists. So if you use a list with a ton of bad data, they'll just block you from the system because their business is at stake as well. So I think the 2 big ones are, make sure that, you allow people to unsubscribe, important, that you respect that and take them off the database and they don't get mail back again. The second is, try and limit the amount of unsolicited mails and don't mail a ton of different people. This is not a very technical response, but I think that covers the 2 broad things that most people are concerned about.
Our next question is from Nitin. He says, what is the maximum file size for the images that can be used for email template?
See, if you use a HTML template, you tend not to use a lot of space. Another thing you can also do is in HTML, instead of drawing a blue box, instead of inserting a blue image, right, you can actually draw a blue box and use that instead. So the box will probably be 2 or 3 KB, but the image might be 15 KB. So I think keep your mails very small. Under 100 KB is good. If you have to, then maybe under 300 KB, but nothing more than that. Of course, this is also subjective. I've seen larger mails work. I've seen smaller ones also work. I think in general, about 300 KB, a maximum of about 300 KB seems to be reasonable.
Our next question is from Sakib. How would you rate email marketing channels in terms of... Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. So he asks, one second. So the question is, how would you rate email marketing channels in terms of an effective campaign And what is the percentage of clicks on links in emails considered good?
Yeah, so I think with emails, typically if you can get about 10 to 20% is good. 20 to 30% is excellent. Definitely well above industry standards. If you create a good message, very focused list, you're careful about who you're mailing, you're packaging the message, so the email, so an emailer could take the form of a newsletter, it could take the form of an actual just email. So depending on the format, I think respectable is between 10 and 20%. Below 10%, you're just like everybody else, mass mailer kind of, you fall into that mass mailer bracket of success. But if it's focused, 10 to 20% is reasonable, 20 to 30% is very good.
Our last question for the day is from Alfred. He says, how can you ensure a continuous level of engagement through email marketing? Once email and no follow-ups from sales will lead to your prospects' level of interest dying out, and greater frequency of mails will also have a negative impact.
Yeah, so I think what Alfred is probably alluding to is sort of the balance. How do you strike a balance between mailing too much or mailing too little? I think the communication from a B2B perspective at least should start with thought leadership, right? So if you and in order to do that, you could start some programs. Maybe you can start a blog, you can start a knowledge journal. So you have to figure out what you want to promote. And so if you're using something related to thought leadership, industry news, things like that, now that kind of communication you can fairly regularly send once every couple of weeks or once a month, depending on the business that you're in. That could be one touch point. The next touch point could become around events. So let's say that you're running an event, a quarterly event, it could be a webinar, or it could be some live event. You'll have that touch point as well. So you will actually have to have multiple messages, some at the corporate level which go out in the form of like a corporate update. One could be an industry newsletter of sorts. One can even just be simple email. So not all of it has to become a marketing gimmick, right? It can just be honest communication from a company to its prospects. So even just simple email updates, hi so-and-so, I hope you've been well, hope everything in your company is doing fine. Even simple emails like that is also a touch point. So the benefit of marketing doing it is that it's usually very rarely perceived as we're trying to sell something, but usually when sales does it, then the fact that it's coming from sales, there's always this attached link that somebody's trying to sell me something. So marketing has an advantage in that space. So if you do a monthly newsletter, maybe an industry newsletter, launch a blog, launch a Twitter feed, if you do a couple of these different programs, and then you do communication around those different programs, the perception is not going to appear that you're actually sending tons of different mails. It will actually appear that you're actually creating value. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Kiran, for that interesting session. Thank you to all our attendees for participating in the webinar, and we are glad that the questions kept coming in, but due to lack of time we are unable to answer all. So please do send in your feedback and suggestions to us at eclub@nenglobal.org, and if you found the session interesting, feel free to blog or post about it. The recorded version of the webinar will be available on our website eclub.nenonline.org by the end of this week. Also, NEN is holding an entrepreneurship workshop on raising money for your startup in Pune on February 2nd, 2013. Register today and get an early bird discount. For more information, visit our website. Thank you once again. Have a nice evening. Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you very much.